Welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast. Did you know that plants are truly amazing? Not only can you grow them and eat them, you can also wear them, drink them, nourish your skin with them, and so much more. Let Ellen and Michael inspire you to love plants as much as they do, as they chat with the movers and shakers in this wonderful plant-based world. So, let's dig in.
The tranquil, soothing, natural sound of flowing water. Listening to it has been shown to lower your heart rate and blood pressure and generally relax your whole body. Combining the magical sound of cascading water with the beauty of plants, Hydria Life will now enable you to use those same health and well-being effects at home or in the garden. Get 10% off their rechargeable Hydria fountain at hydrialife.com. All you need to do is quote the code PLANT24 when ordering. Hey guys, it's me, Michael, 50% of the Plant-Based Podcast. Sorry, I've been away a bit. I've been a little bit unwell, almost March was deleted from my calendar because I was going through a few different health issues. Anyone that follows me on social media will know kind of what I've been dealing with, but I'm not going to drone on about it here. But I might get Ellen to interview me for a future episode talking about how plants and nature really help me, which of course we all know, but I would just love to give you guys a few of those examples. But anyway, I'm slowly getting myself back into work here and there, so I'm feeling good about that. Very pleased that spring is on the way as well, which is super news. And I've had a little peek of the tulip fields. Very lucky to get that at the weekend. So I hope to be back there in a couple of weeks. But somewhere I will be this weekend, and by the time you listen to this podcast, it will be over, but I think everyone will be talking about it, is the RHS Urban Show. And I'm really looking forward to this. I'm hosting the stage just for one day, not all four. So that's part of my recuperation. So be proud of me, guys. And they are going to have some really unique, unusual displays. One of which will be the Caley Brothers, who are the queens of fungi. They're really, really brilliant. They're sisters. They're not brothers at all, which is crazy, I know. But they know their ins and outs with mushrooms and fungi. I've been to one of their wonderful masterclasses as well, which was superb. And yeah, this was a brilliant episode where we spoke to them. We delved into how to grow mushrooms, what they are, what to do with them, how to eat them, kind of all the strange ways you can create amazing displays with them as well. So I think that you're going to enjoy this episode as much as I did with the recording of it. So without further ado, sounds so posh, I'm going to hand you over to Ellen and I talking to Jodie and Lorraine from Caley Brothers. Enjoy. So on the podcast today, when I introduce our guests, you might be a little bit surprised because maybe you've read the description already and you're expecting the Caley Brothers to talk to you about mushrooms. Well, it's not quite how it seems. But anyway, today we're going to learn how to grow, harvest and cook mushrooms yourself at home. And the Caley Brothers are great. They recently hit the horticultural world by storm with their cool fungi that were growing in cocktail glasses at the Chelsea Flower Show, and that actually helped them win a gold with the Planet Studio houseplant display. So, welcome to the podcast, Lorraine and Jodie.
Hello.
I love that. Hi, brothers Lorraine and Jodie.
Brother sisters.
So you need to tell us what the deal is. How do you have a brand name that kind of initially looks like it doesn't suit you?
It does, and we love how interested in our brand name people are. So Caley Brothers is really important to us, and it is our brand name because it's homage to our family and our roots. So my maiden name and Lorraine's surname is Caley. And our grandparents, so our grandfather and his brother, set up Caley Brothers in the 1950s. We like to say that they were the original Ocado. So they bought a big van. They used to go out to Borough Market, buy groceries. Nanny used to do barrels of pickled onions and ladle them into jars. And so they started delivering groceries where we grew up, around Molesey, the estates around there in Surrey. And then they opened a greengrocers in Molesey. Our dad worked there. Growing was always a massive part of our childhood, allotments, farm stays, these sorts of things. And so when we started growing mushrooms, it was really important. We'd just lost our dad, so it was really important to us to sort of have the family name. And it just lent itself to it. Plus, they designed really great branding, and we really liked it. And we had a massive picture of the sign up on our grandparents' wall. And so when we were doing this, we were just like, I think it naturally lends itself. And we never really thought about the brother aspect until people were like, oh, but you're sisters. And we were like, oh, yeah, we are.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We do have a brother.
We do have a brother.
He is involved, but he has another career, and so we have to call him in to do, you know, the heavy lifting, and when we need an extra pair of hands. So he doesn't get away with not being involved in the business. We have to pull him in.
So he's a sleeping brother. Yeah.
That's a lovely piece of history. I really love hearing how like companies get going and, you know, kind of what inspired them to do that in the first place. But you have like a lovely history, don't you, into what you're doing, which is really nice.
That's it. We started growing mushrooms because we wanted to eat a more plant-based diet, and we couldn't buy the ones we wanted. And so, you know, it just really developed out of our own need. And then people really enjoyed what we were growing and how we were growing and the story behind it. And it just built from there. So
yeah, that's really cool.
Our branding is the exact copy of the handwritten sign, the hand-painted sign back in the 1950s. So that's how that's kind of developed as well.
Wow. Oh, wow. Wouldn't your ancestors be so proud of you?
Yeah, well, the original Caley Brothers are still growing. Granddad and his brother, Uncle Bill, they're in their mid-90s now, but the OG Caley Brothers are still around.
That's amazing. That's really, really cool. Like you just touched on wanting to grow mushrooms based upon wanting to eat more of a plant-based diet, and kind of mushrooms or fungi in general has really, I don't know, it's captured everyone's kind of minds a bit more recently, hasn't it?
That's
and
right.
I've seen so many different, there's different reasons for that, but I've seen so many different ways of growing mushrooms as well. I know that obviously we're going to talk about the kits that you send out, but there's so many different ways of growing mushrooms. Can you talk us through some of the ways you know how to do that, like for us home gardeners?
Yeah, well, there's lots of many ways depending on the amount of space you have. So you can do kits inside. So if you don't have a garden or you don't have much space, you can bring them indoors and they don't take up any room at all, really. But if you do have space outside, you can inoculate logs with dowels. So you can get freshly cut logs of really just 50 centimetres in size, so not too much, and you can stack them up like totems. So they don't take up too much room in your garden, and you can grow all kinds of varieties on logs really easily. Or another way that people are really interested, if they've got a little bit more room or a veg patch or a little space under trees, is garden beds. And again, you can grow all kinds of different varieties really easily. It's just about accessing really good quality spawn from a really good source and knowing how to do it, which is very simple. And we love talking to people and people interested in growing mushroom beds. So you can do that as well. So there are lots of different ways depending on your space availability.
So when you say beds, you mean kind of like in the ground, as it were?
Yeah.
Almost as if you're doing radishes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
We grow mushrooms on the farm in West Sussex, and so we have lots of spent substrate. We then put that into our garden and into my vegetable patches over the winter, and so I have oyster mushrooms growing all in my veg patches whilst there's nothing else growing over the winter period. So
Wow.
you can grow anywhere.
They couple up quite nicely with lots of different veg as well, and fruit, because we grow on straw, and of course straw naturally goes underneath strawberry plants, so you can get your strawberry plants growing through the summer alongside your oyster mushrooms as well. So they're a great one for the garden.
Okay, because I've got this kind of like bark path that kind of goes to my compost bin, and I'd be really happy to populate that with mushrooms. And when I was in Poland, they were selling mushroom like spores in packets, almost as if they were seed packets on a rack in the UK, and it was amazing. I bought two, but I haven't even opened them yet. I really need to kind of do something with them. But what would be the kind of life cycle of when would you sow mushrooms potentially? What time of year would you actually set those spores off?
Well, you want to give them enough time to really get growing before any of the cold weather sets in. So any time really from after the last frosts. So in the spring is a really good time because the weather's really nice and gentle. You'll be able to get out there and water it frequently, or use the April rains to really embed the mycelium into your. If you've got a bark path, then that's great growing medium.
But a little bit too late now, would you say, because it's a little bit too dry now?
It's getting a little bit close, because what you want is a good couple of months of it getting growing before it gets too cold. What will happen, though, if you look after it, is the mycelium will just go dormant in the colder weather, because obviously you have fungi growing all through the year. And when it gets cold, it just slows down, it goes dormant. And then when it warms up again, it will just get growing again. If you're using something like oyster mushrooms, they're a really strong strain. And so they can tolerate lots of different growing conditions. So it's a really good beginner one to get started with if you're wanting to just have a play around.
Okay, well, I've got, Bullet, is that a type of... Yeah. There's two different packs that are similar to those, but my concern is because I've already seen some mushrooms grow in different parts of the garden, but it's almost like I would sow those spores and then maybe some other ones would come up as well, and I'd be like, oh, which ones are the ones that are edible? Because of course that's a whole drama, isn't it?
It's a whole nother world, exactly. You're dipping into foraging there, and you really need to have an expert on hand if you're...
I know, and we are going to ask you about that in a minute, but I just wonder first, before we move on, if it's very useful to point out to listeners what a mushroom really is, what is a fungi, what is mycelium. You hear all of these words. How exactly, are they made up? And what is the bit under the ground? What is the mushroom? I think it's really nice to point that out for everyone, if you could, please.
Okay, lovely. No, that's a great question, because even as growers, we're perpetually learning. We've always got books and audio books that we've got on the go. So the mycelium is the white stuff that lays underground. And if you're in the forest and you turn over a rotten log, it'll be the white, kind of slightly stringy, almost very fine, noodly like that's going through that goes through the undergrowth. So that's the mycelium, and that's the equivalent of the roots. So mushrooms for years have been associated with vegetables, but they're actually, I think in the 1960s, they were finally divided and separated as their own kingdom. But a lot of the references when we talk about the terminology of mushrooms is still related very much plant-based. So the mycelium we would describe as the roots. They go underground. They help turn the kind of detritus of the forest back into nutrients, and they take that all back down into the ground and they process it in order for themselves and the trees and plants to then take back up into to help them grow. And the mycelium is made up of very fine kind of hairs, microscopic, and these are referred to as hyphae. And these are very, very fine, and they grow through, over, and under anything that they come across. The reason why mushrooms are separate from vegetation is they sit between vegetation and humans or people because of mainly the way they digest their food. They don't rely on photosynthesis. Instead, the hyphae emit an enzyme which then digests the food, and then they absorb that back in through the hyphae. So that's why they're in their own little element as opposed to sitting in either camp. And when the conditions are right, there's a nice flow of air, there's some water or downpour, or the weather warms up, then the mycelium will start, you'll start seeing mushrooms popping up out of the mycelium. So the mushrooms are just deemed as kind of the fruit. And within them, they emit the spores, which is also seen as kind of the pollen of the mushroom, and that goes out and lands, and the whole process starts again.
Wow, and the pollen, like the spores, they're ready to go, aren't they? They don't need fertilizing or anything.
They are ready to go. I'm just learning about it at the moment. That's like a whole new world of how that works. There is a degree of, there's a scent in the air along with them, which can encourage other mushrooms to pop up. So there's a degree of kind of mixing and mingling. But if I'm honest with you, we're taught so much about the birds and the bees and pollinating and stuff like that. Mushrooms is a whole new world. We're just beginning to scratch
the whole next frontier for us all to understand, isn't it? And the goodness of us. And I think it's strange because the fruiting body of the mushroom is only a small part of the whole network that it creates as well, isn't it?
Yeah, what goes on underground and then the spores that go into the air. It's quite an incredible, it's like a whole universe to itself, isn't it, really?
It's so incredible. And people are just tuning into how important fungi are for soil health, as well as our nutrition as humans. It's so important to be looking after the fungi. And actually, when you see mushrooms pop up in your garden, it's a really good sign of soil health.
Okay, that's really good.
I really love lion's mane mushroom. And like when you make it, I know we're going to talk about cooking later, you make it into like a steak or something. So I bought some of the plugs to grow on the allotment and drilled holes in a log and popped the plugs into the log. And then, so hopefully, perhaps I might get some lion's mane mushroom at some point in the next year. I don't really know, but
amazing. Yeah, you should see something come up next spring. If you make sure that your log doesn't dry out, you keep it really nice and hydrated on during the summer, especially when it's not raining. And then come spring next year, you should really start to see it grow. That's so exciting.
Can't wait. Sorry, Michael, can I just say, you were saying about growing them in wood chip. I've got to just tell you this. I think it was last year on the allotment, I got some new wood chip delivered for some of the paths, and anyway, I put it down, and then out of nowhere, there was all this stuff growing, and it genuinely looked like vomit. Yeah, and I was kind of like, "What?
I remember
what
the
is
pictures.
that?" It was so horrible. It's probably the most disgusting looking fungi ever.
For the night.
And obviously, it's known as dog sick fungi, and like it genuinely did look like that. I know that's so gross, but when you think about all the different shapes and forms of fungi and the smells and the edible nature of some of them and the medicinal nature of some of them, I just think it's absolutely incredible. And we don't know enough about them yet, do we, at all?
No, we really
in terms
just
of our
tapping into
access.
it.
Sorry, in terms of our access to them, it's really difficult. We only started growing 3 or 4 years ago because of our change in diet, and we were reading what was the book, Jodie? Sorry, the recipe book.
Wicked Kitchen Boys book.
Kitchen Boys, and the recipes in there, we were like, we can't get hold of all these gourmet mushrooms that everyone's talking about. Even with a large superstore down the road, they just do the portobello, the closed cup mushrooms, and that was it. And that's what encouraged us to start growing. Because just a few years ago, you couldn't get hold of all these gourmet mushrooms, and now there are so many more available to us. And the growing and the ability to grow them in your own home is much more available as well, which is fantastic to see.
Yeah, that's really cool. So kind of like, we're going to touch on foraging in a moment, but also, for foraging and if you growing mushrooms in your own garden, what is really the harvest period? And how do you know when it's ready to harvest as well? And when you do harvest, should you harvest everything or you should leave some in place as well? How does that all work, please?
Gosh, well, with our kits, we do oyster mushroom kits amongst others. So with our kits, ours are when the cups begin to unfurl and the caps are kind of on a flatter range. Also, when the spores begin to drop, that's a good sign that they're ready to go and they've hit their best. They're at their peak. Out and about, that's a harder one to. They don't last very long, mushrooms.
It's really open to the elements, isn't it?
Yeah, the smell is a good one to follow with anything. I think if it doesn't smell quite right, and we're the same with our kits. When you open them up, they should have this kind of natural, earthy, fresh smell about them. But if there's anything slightly funky about them, we'd probably avoid them quite happily.
That's it. And outdoor growing, it's really open to the elements. So you'll see when there's a good bit of rain, when it's been a little bit overcast, you're more likely to get mushrooms popping up. So that's when you need to head outside and really check your garden beds. And outside, you need to get to them a lot earlier, because when you've got your indoor kits, it's much more controlled. You know when you're going to harvest them, but outside you have to be constantly checking and get to them before the bugs do.
I see. Cool.
I do. You're talking about like them making sure they smell okay. They should be earthy. What's the one that looks like male genitalia And it absolutely
stinkhorn.
the stinkhorn. And my friend has a campsite up here in Norfolk, and she's got some woodland around it. And she said, "Ellen, you have to come here. You won't believe what I found." And we went into the woodland, and there was just tons of it. And it absolutely reeked.
I saw this picture. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I definitely posted the picture.
So it was like a load of dicks in a field.
A load of smelly ones as well.
It's like my worst nightmare. It was like a thing of nightmares. I was just like, oh my God, this is
It doesn't sound like much of a nightmare.
Yeah. But also it was absolutely incredible. Anyway. Yeah.
they do that to attract flies, and the flies are what are going to spread the spores. So it's they want to do that, but it is pretty gross for us humans.
It really is, but it is totally fascinating as well. Yeah. So yeah, talking of just finding them out in the woodland, thinking about foraging. I know there's loads of you can go on foraging classes and walks and fungi forays and all of that kind of thing. What do you recommend? If people want to go out looking to harvest, forage for mushrooms and harvest them themselves, what do you recommend you should do?
There's some amazing foragers. I mean, we're really lucky as we've got great access to really good expert foragers, and you can find them really easily online. So if you're new to it, I definitely recommend hooking up with an expert. Failing that, there's some really detailed, really interesting foraging guides. Get yourself a book. I mean, but our advice would always be don't pick anything unless you're 100% certain, unless you're with someone that can really, really guide you, because there's some edible mushrooms that look very like lots of unedible mushrooms. And so, it is tricky. But first of all, go out with someone who can open your eyes. When we started going out with a couple of foragers, we were just amazed at how much there is out there to see. And it really opened our eyes. And then we got a couple of field guides that you can really start to follow and talk to people about and see. But we still don't go out picking to consume. We go out in nature, we go out in fields to go and have a look, because we don't feel that we're knowledgeable enough about wild mushrooms to be able to pick to eat. But it's that you've got to be cautious and safe first, but do get out there and be interested and open your eyes to what is out there.
Yeah,
one of those things, once you start looking, you can't help see more and more and more. And it wasn't until we went foraging that you kind of took for granted as to how much there is out there and how accessible it is. It's well worth going and looking at least with a field guide, so you can point and see.
I love going to spot mushrooms. I love going to find them and taking a picture of them, and and then I do the geeky thing where I come back and Google it to see what it is. But I'm too scared to ever pick anything out in the wild. I just daren't do it. I'd rather grow them at home.
That's it. And I think lockdown and people going out for their daily walks really built a community of people that are in the same boat. Really open people's eyes to what's out there and to nature and interest. And lots of people taking photos and trying to identify and really building the community of mushroom enthusiasts.
But I think generally, in different countries, there's different understandings and appreciation, because in Eastern Europe, it would be quite normal, for a Polish family to pick their own mushrooms from the wild and to have that awareness that is kind of passed through generations. And certainly in the supermarket, you would see a lot more different types. I was in China for a while, and certainly in the supermarket there, you saw some proper cool, wild looking fungi. It was really a whole nother world. And I think compare that to what you said about earlier, where, in our shops, we only got portobello, maybe a few button ones. We're really only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what you can use, So
we really are. And it's so much, as you say, in Eastern Europe, it's cultural. And and in England, I really feel there's more of a sort of fungi phobia, and we're really just sort of starting to break down that idea that mushrooms are something to be afraid of. Stick to your staples. And go no further. And it's nice to see that people are getting more interested, and we're taking on a more of a world view approach to fungi as opposed to the terrified place we were at before.
Yeah, I think almost conversely, when we're younger in this country, it's passed on how dangerous mushrooms can be. Yeah. Which is the whole flip side of it. Yeah.
That's it.
Apart from the emoji one's always seen as cute, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But I wish there were eatable mushroom emojis. That would be much better for me.
Yeah. What would be the
I
most
agree.
attractive eatable one that we could have as an emoji? Maybe we can email Apple about it.
Your chestnut mushroom, I think, would probably be your most visual. But I suppose you run the risk of shove a couple of eyes on it from a distance. It might still look like the poo.
Yeah.
A nice pink oyster mushroom would be lovely.
Yes.
Or a black trumpet or something.
That would be good. Or chanterelle. I love the yellow chanterelle would be good as well. They're quite recognisable.
Oh, this is like Mushroom Fantasy League.
Fantasy League, yeah.
Yeah. What about then cooking with mushrooms? Because I've got a friend who, I don't know if he listens to this podcast, but he's so irritating because he really hates mushrooms, and he hates even like the smell, the taste of them. They're quite an acquired taste to some people, but even like what drives me mad about him, his name is Sal, if he is listening, is he even like, if you like tell him there's mushroom in something, he doesn't want to eat it. Which has almost then become psychological because, of course, not all mushrooms taste the same. How did they get a bad name as being this acquired taste? And how would you use them? Is there any exciting different ways you can use them? And, of course, are they nutritious? They are good for it. They're not like sweet corn, are they? They don't come out.
No, they're very good for you. I suppose we touched back on the Brit sphere of food on that one again, and in the they've probably got a bad press over the years. I remember growing up, I didn't like them. I thought that they once cooked, because they were usually overcooked, and they were just your chestnut mushroom or your white button mushroom. They were like slugs. They kind of had the texture and the appearance of slugs.
It's because we've got no cooking skills in the UK, isn't it?
No, and because the classic in all the restaurants next to your prawn cocktail would have been your garlic mushrooms. So it was they weren't really used that much. So when lockdown hit, prior to that, we were supplying quite a few fresh mushrooms to local cafes and restaurants. So when they closed their doors, we were left with an abundance of oyster mushrooms almost on a daily basis for a fair few weeks. So we really got into cooking with mushrooms. Also, the kind of plant-based diet is something we're very fond of and keen to try and stick to. But we also grew up with classic lasagna, spaghetti bolognese, Hema meals, which are all very beef-heavy, mince-based. And the hardest thing we found about converting our diet is learning a whole new host of cooking techniques. So when lockdown happened, we had this abundance of mushrooms. We learned to cook our classics, but utilising mushrooms as a meat substitute. And that's worked really well. And different mushrooms have different roles in that. The chestnut and the white cup mushroom, they're quite good finely chopped and can take on a lot of flavours. If you're your friend that says they taste too mushroomy, then he probably just needs to beef up the sauce maybe amongst his what he's eating them with, or go for a milder mushroom like an oyster, because an oyster mushroom's quite nice, and along with the king oyster mushroom, they tear and marinate like chicken. So if you wanted to do any of your classic chicken pulled pork as well meals, you could easily substitute your meat for the mushroom instead. Tear it, marinate it, and cook it in the same way. And it's a great substitute. And it's not even necessarily for people wanting to go to completely plant-based. If you just wanted to reduce your meat intake or reduce your meals.
It's not always about switching entirely. It's about just embracing different foods that have got goodness for you, you know?
That's it. And especially Sorry. Shiitake, and like you said earlier with the lion's mane, you've got this incredible texture of mushroom that has such a great flavour. You don't need to do too much to it, a bit of seasoning. And we also use mushrooms as seasoning. We dry them and add them to herbs and spices and use them to add flavour to dishes and cooking. And with that, you're adding the nutrition. Mushrooms have a great amount of nutrition. Different mushrooms have different levels. You've got your big medicinal mushrooms, which have different properties to ones like the oyster mushrooms. But adding any mushroom to any meal is going to give you a great level of fiber, protein. If you put your mushrooms out in the sunshine, it absorbs vitamin D, and then by consuming that, you're consuming more vitamin D as well. You know, they've got really amazing properties.
So what you do, you just put it in the sun. What do you do?
Just put it in the sun, yeah.
Really?
They have melamine within their skin, so they within the mushroom skins, so they have the ability to absorb as much vitamin D as they need from the sun, and then to protect themselves from any harmful rays from the sun as well.
Wow,
that's so really cool. I've made a beef bourguignon from mushrooms. So obviously I'm vegan, so we have to mention that I'm vegan on every single show, because if I don't, Michael will say some quip about it. I use chestnut mushrooms to replace the beef in a beef bourguignon, and I have served that to a few people who are meat eaters, and they've just said that it was incredible. They wouldn't even have known. No. So the texture can really genuinely replace meat in certain dishes.
It can. I do. My children don't actually like eating mushrooms, so they love growing them, but so I have to sneak them in, and I do this dish where I crisp and batter them up, and then you can have them with any sort of sauce, but we do it with a honey soy glaze. And some people might ordinarily, in fact the recipe does it with chicken, but I substitute it for a good chunky mushroom, and because it's just covered in crispy goodness, well seasoned in this delicious sauce, they don't notice and they don't mind the difference. And that's one of my favourite mushroom dishes.
That's really cool. Where do you stand on mushroom coffee, though?
It's not for me, because I'm a big coffee drinker and I need the caffeine.
It's quite earthy, isn't it? Like chaga and a couple of other ones. They do in little sachets now, don't they? Yeah, but I'm not sure either. And I try a lot of new foods, so...
I like to kind of mushroomize as much as I can. So if we go somewhere and I like the meal, but maybe it's more meat-based or something else, I like to bring it home and try and see if I can do it with mushrooms. So like the Bang Bang chicken, which is quite popular. I think Wagamamas do it at the moment. Again, we substitute the chicken for mushrooms, especially a shiitake mushroom, because that's got such a meaty flavour to it. But I was just texting Jodie about cold brew coffee and wondering whether we can, because that's where you coarsely grind your coffee grounds, then leave it overnight. But if we included some, because we have on our website as well, dried mushroom powder, if we incorporated a good couple of spoonfuls of mushroom powder and gave it 24 hours to infuse, we're wondering how that would go down. So that's on my list of things to do this afternoon.
She's always sending me weird and wonderful recipes. She's got a list currently of popcorn mushroom flavours that she wants to try out. So she's a bit Willy Wonka when it comes to mushrooms, I have to say.
But I don't see the problem with that.
No, not at all. Not at all. Some is surprisingly good.
Well, we couldn't talk about mushrooms in an episode on the podcast without touching on the magic ones. What knowledge might you ladies have about magic mushrooms? Or, on a more serious level, kind of, the medicinal uses for mushrooms, the kind of adaptogens. We're seeing a lot of movement with that, aren't we, at the moment? And I think that is almost like the next frontier for mushrooms. At the moment we're embracing them in cooking, but there's a lot more to them as well, isn't there?
There's a lot more, and there's some really interesting stuff coming out. There's some, I'm down in Sussex, and there's some Brighton talks coming out about magic mushrooms, their uses within helping people with depression and mental health issues. Paul Stamets has released some really interesting talks about it. So if you want to explore that side of thing, it's very easy to find. Currently reading a book called Mycophobia. Is it Mycophobia, Lorraine, that we're listening to?
Sounds good.
And so there's some really interesting chats about it. We were asked quite a lot about magic mushrooms. We just grow eatables, but we're fascinated by fungi as an entire picture. There's so much interesting stuff that's going on. But yeah, Paul Stamets has been in the press a lot recently with his current chats about magic mushrooms, hasn't he?
Okay.
That's right. The book is In Search of Mycotopia. Mycotopia.
I have to order that.
It's really interesting. It's a great read.
Okay.
And then dare I say it, And I'm certainly not saying to anybody you should go and just try any old mushroom for sure, because you could get seriously ill. But I did go on a fungi foray with a guide a few years ago now. And he actually said that, well, some can make you very, very sick. It's actually very rare that someone will die from eating a poisonous mushroom. So please don't go and try them at home if you're listening. But, do you think that we've kind of put them, because of the whole magic mushroom thing and talking about how poisonous they are, and then even fairy tales and cartoons and stuff, do you think that's made us more wary of them at all? Or do they deserve that rap?
I think it's made them unnecessary, especially over here in the UK, unnecessarily wary, because as we touched upon earlier, culturally, other people, have such a wider understanding that's just part of normal everyday life. Foraging is part of normal day life. It's handed down from generation to generation, and they don't have the same fear as we do. And I think it's slowly the world is opening up, and more people are becoming less scared, and they're more interested, and it's not as terrifying. So I think they do have a bad rap, and there's a lot more we can learn from them medicinally as well as nutritionally, and I think we're getting there.
Yeah, I think there's been a big lack of research go into mushrooms and what they can do, and just generally them in their own state. There's a lot more going on now, and there's a lot more understanding, but it's very, very slow. Even kind of the terminology. When anyone mentions mushrooms, there's usually the first few questions that come out: do you grow magic ones and stuff like that? So there's a and that doesn't just happen at kind of low-level conversations, between friends. That happens. We've got people that we know of that are trying to take this through, higher grounds, through government, in order to secure funding, and they suffer from the same questions as well. There's kind of a lack of knowledge, a lack of seriousness in the research department, but there's an underground movement. It's definitely moving. We're much more aware of it, and it's nice to see. So who knows?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It's an exciting area to explore, isn't it?
Yeah. Cool. Well, tell us what do you do as a company then? Because you've got some grow at home kits, haven't you? And are they in a lot of different types? Kind of how do they work? And are they easy to grow?
We do. So we started growing oyster mushrooms. They're the easiest and probably most forgiving to grow. They're also the return on an oyster mushroom kit is fantastic. It's a quick turnaround. Once they start pinning, they kind of double in size every day. So the kind of satisfaction and the reward on a kit is good. But we also do workshops. We didn't start out by doing workshops. They've been born out of demand more than anything, the curiosity of people wanting to grow. And within our workshops, what we do is we gather a load of visitors, and they come and they make their own kits. We get them layering the substrate, coffee grounds, straw, sawdust, and mixing in their mycelium. And then at the end of the session, we get them to sit down and maybe try some of our mushroom truffles, mushroom dips, mushroom bread. And kind of throughout the whole of that session, it's just a big chat and geek out about mushrooms and growing mushrooms and what's going on inside your kit. And then kind of 3 weeks after they've gone home, they start their kits having had it completely colonized and changed from this kind of layered bag of ingredients to now a kind of fully colonized substrate block.
Oh, that is cool. So your business is really going from strength to strength. Obviously, you've got the kits, you've got the workshops. You've just done this amazing display at Chelsea, which you guys need to look this up because it was really cool and inspiring. What is next after you've done Chelsea? What do you do after Chelsea?
It was really exciting. Chelsea was an incredible opportunity to collaborate with some really special people, and we were chuffed to be a part of it. To see mushrooms grown in ceramic pots within a houseplant display was, very cool. A new place for us to be. So we've done Chelsea. We also do consultations. So we're currently working with Centre Court in Wimbledon and installing a farm as part of. They've installed growing spaces on the roof, beehives, and also a mushroom farm to reuse the coffee grounds from local businesses. And so that's underway, which is really exciting, to turn a shopping centre into more of a community space through growing. So we're really excited to be a part of that. We're next at Hampton Court Flower Show. They've invited us to be a part of their new Grow Your Own initiative. So we're doing a couple of presentations about how to grow mushrooms there. And it's just about growing more mushrooms, talking to people about growing more mushrooms, and really communicating how exciting it is. So we're excited for the next bit.
That's amazing. Really, really cool. So
Very cool.
It's just been really, really interesting for listeners and also for us as well to kind of learn more about mushrooms, which are kind of all around us pretty much all the time. We just can't see them at most points, not until they fruit.
That's it.
No.
I have to just say, I do have one of your grow kits, and the rate at which the pink oyster mushroom has grown is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So, like, I just opened it and they were teeny tiny. And then the next day they were perhaps like a few centimeters. This is three or 4 days later, and they're huge. Like,
That's so
it's
cool.
just amazing how fast they grow, and it's so exciting to see. I can imagine kids loving it as well.
Yeah.
They're a really good experiment project, aren't they?
It's really enjoyable.
To help kids realise mushrooms are not all scary, and something to be feared.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're coming to the end of the podcast, but where could people find out more about you guys, please?
So we're online. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and then we have our website. So our handle is @Caley Brothers, and that's CALEYBROTHERS. That's where you can find most of our information. We keep the Instagram updated with workshops, markets, and then any other exciting events that we've got coming up ahead as well.
Okay, absolutely super. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Thank you, brothers. Thank you, brothers, Lorraine and Judy.
Cool. See you later, guys. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
The tranquil, soothing, natural sound of flowing water. Listening to it has been shown to lower your heart rate and blood pressure and gently relax your whole body. Combining the magical sound of cascading water with the beauty of plants, Hydria Life now enable you to enjoy these same health and well-being benefits at home or in the garden. Get 10% off their rechargeable Hydria fountain at hydrialife.com when you quote code PLANT24 on ordering. That's PLANT24 on ordering.
The music for the Plant-Based podcast is part of the song Grow by Mikey James, and our editor is Gareth Patch of Semi Echo.